afternoon, good evening, anyone watching now or later in the podcast platforms. It is my absolute pleasure to be joined tonight by Mexican horror writer Miss Violet Castro. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? Thank you for having me and welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in.
No.
Greatly
It's
appreciated.
no, like I said, it is my pleasure. So hang on, because I was obviously doing a little bit of research about you, and I think you were born in Mexico. Is that right?
Born in
Or
Texas,
born
but
in
I'm
Texas?
Mexican American. Both of my parents are
Right.
Mexican as well, Mexican American. So on my mom, I'm like third generation. On my dad, I'm second generation.
Okay. But now you're living
Mhm.
in London.
Yeah.
How are you finding it?
Well, before we were discussing how much I love Spain because there's sunshine.
Yeah.
And in
Absolutely.
England, it's really wet and dreary. Um, it's yeah, it's not the same. You don't have the same type of seasons. So it's okay. I definitely yeah, but the only good thing the best part of London is that you are at the doorstep of so many places. So to get to Europe is
Yeah.
insanely easy. To get to France, you can drive there. If you
Yeah.
take the Eurotunnel, you can be in Spain in like a couple of hours. You could be in Milan in like an hour and a half. It's just fantastic. So,
Yeah. No, I'm asking because I lived in and around the London area for about 21 years.
oh wow.
Um, I was my wife was born in London. Her family is still there. We were there for a week over at Christmas. And like you said, we didn't get to see not even the sun, just the blue of the sky for the whole
Nope.
week. But this last trip we did, I found it a little bit depressing. Like things aren't going so well as they were going 2, 3, 4 years back.
Mhm.
My impression is that the after effects of Brexit are still ongoing. Have you got any reference point about that?
I think Brexit was an absolute shame, just like I feel that a lot of immigration policies across the board really are problematic because you're discounting a whole population who are part of the workforce. They contribute to society despite what politicians want to say. But for everyday life, having people come from other places to work, to visit, to go to school, all of these different things, it's really valuable. But also, sharing cultures that just in that in itself um, promotes unity and a better understanding of people as opposed to um, pitting each other against pitting
Mm,
everyone against each other and creating even more animosity. So yeah, I'm not a fan of Brexit.
yeah, I left. I left in 2019, so maybe it was just a couple of years
Yeah.
after. And I think every time we go back, in my
Mm.
opinion, things seem to be going ever so slightly worse and worse for the people that have stayed in the UK. But anyway, so moving from that, so you grew up in what, Texas, south of the
Mhm.
US. Um, what made you become a writer? Well, every author I've interviewed, it's always been there. It's something that you have to do. So what was that like for you? What prompted that journey?
Honestly, I just have to repeat it. It was always there. So, being Mexican American, I've grew up with lots of different folk tales, urban legends, the mythology, um, even the history of Mexico, going back to when those Spanish arrived. um, you know, it's always those stories have always been there. And so for me, it was just my imagination just ran with it. So when I was a little girl, I was a bookworm. I loved films. I watched, I think a lot, like a lot of people of my generation, I'm 45, watched things that maybe were a bit out of range, but I didn't care. You know, things were a lot different back then. And I just always loved horror, science fiction, just genre fiction in general. And, you know, I made that leap from like scary stories to tell in the dark and, you know, kind of what you would consider now, but it didn't exist back then, YA, to like reading
Yeah.
Stephen King and Kuntz. But I've always loved it. It's always been there. But it wasn't until later in life that I really was able to kind of, I guess I wasn't ready. You know, I think everything has like a divine timing to it, as annoying as that can be, but the timing wasn't right.
Right. And so, I mean, you mentioned Stephen King and Dean Koontz, but what would you say were your seminal influences? Sort of your formative readings that then you sort of presumably shifted away from early in your writing career.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's all been kind of that oral tradition. The earliest was just, you know, family talking about these folk tales, this mythology. You know, knowing what Dia de los Muertos is, getting the history behind that. Oh, so well, what is there with Dia de los Muertos? Well, who is the Queen of the Dead? Who are the dogs that meet you when you die to take you across the river? If you were kind to animals in this life, like what were the 9 trials? You know, all these different things, and this real belief that spirits and the supernatural are real. I mean, I grew up with, you know, mal de ojo, and you know, using the egg and all of that was in my life since I was really little. So people could say, oh, that's supernatural and it's a topic of books, but that was just life.
Okay, interesting. Because obviously you present yourself, you're very much aware of your heritage, both in the way you present yourself and in your works. Now, here's my question: Is that do you feel that can sort of pigeonhole you into a certain category? Can that be a bit constraining when, you know, pursuing your works, or is that something that you feel comfortable with, or is that a selling point that you're happy to go along? Like, what's the take there?
Yeah, honestly, I'm just being myself. And like, so I wrote the books for the Netflix film Rebel Moon, for example,
Yeah.
which is like just a sci-fi, you know, just, it has nothing to do with me culturally, but I was very blessed to have gotten that job. I wrote a story for in the world of Conan. Again, not even culturally relevant to me at all. But for the most part, you know, I feel like a lot of literature has not reflected, you know, where I come from. It hasn't reflected the mythology, the history, especially coming from someone like me. Ah, yes, I love like Water for Chocolate. I read that when I was so young. And I remember watching the film and it was like super scandalous and sexy. And I was like, should I be reading this? I'm like, really, I think, how old was I? I wasn't even a teenager yet, I think. I remember
Right.
just seeing the cover. But yeah, so, you know, if it pigeonholes me, I write everything. You know, I just put out a nonfiction piece about my plant medicine journey going to the Amazon and doing plant medicine with a shaman, with the Quechua people in Ecuador, and talking about, you know, what prompted me to do that, my other experiences with plant medicine, and being a Santa Muerte devotee. What does that mean to me? Because there's so much misinformation about it. So for me, I'm just me. And however people take it is how they take it. Because again, I'm 45 years old. I spent a lot of my life, you know, caring what other people people think. And now I'm at the point where I'm just like, you know what? I've got how many good years left? I better make it count. And people who are want to come along for the ride, great. If they don't, great. Yeah. I hope
No, no,
that
no.
answers your question.
No, absolutely, and I can't relate, and I totally respect that. I mean, we're not. I'm going to turn 45 this year, so we are of an age, and just like you,
Yeah.
I think maybe around the time when my second son was born or something like
Hmm.
that, it was just like, nah, I'm just gonna be me. Like I can't, you can't. It's so true. You can't spend your time pleasing other people because you end up pleasing no one and driving yourself absolutely insane. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've got
I have 3 children, so
yeah, yeah, and three. Well, I mean, from what I hear, I've only got two, but three apparently is the number from which everything just goes to pot. You might as well have five or three; it makes no difference. So
yeah,
they
I
tell
mean,
me.
well, absolutely. I mean, my oldest is 18, so he's a man. He's in university already.
Yeah,
So it's kind of like I say I have 3 children, but I'm down to 2.
you're counting down.
I'm down
Fantastic.
to 2.
That's that's a very good way to put it. Um, yeah, like now I only talk to people that I really want to talk to, and like socially, there are some people like now when maybe someone has done something to me or acted in a way that just doesn't reflect my own values. And it's like, yeah, you're there. I'll be civil. I'll say hello, but I don't feel like I need to
Yeah,
devote my time to build a relationship
yeah,
with certain people. I made my peace with that. Um, so I totally get what you're saying. And you've and I suppose as well, a lot of writers and always the advice that you get is write about what you know. So I suppose for you, you're writing about or putting a twist on these traditional tales that you've been told since you were a
yeah,
girl.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And also the film. So, I wrote Aliens Vasquez. Vasquez in the Aliens film was, people loved her. Unfortunately, she died in the film.
Early on, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but, she's just one of these characters that stood out in people's minds. And I was like, you know what? I have got to write her story. I have got to really give her, um, you know, skin and bones and blood. And
Mm,
because she was supposed to be uh, Mexican American, I then went back and said, okay, what was important in my life growing up? How can I really make her background rich? So one thing I did was, at Easter, we make these things called cascarones, which are like
mm.
hollowed out eggs with confetti and you smash them on people's heads. But they're eggs. And so I used her making cascarones and hunting people down to like attack them with cascarones to foreshadow her encounter with the eggs, the alien eggs. Because
Nice
for
one.
me, I wanted to like loop back to those things. There were a lot of stereotypes about her. And I said, okay, if we're going to have a stereotype, then we're going to delve into it and why these things happen. Why was she in juvenile hall? Why was she accused of murder? Why? And I wanted to go deeper into the canon of it. Um,
Hmm.
so that was just super fun for me. I just love that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is something you've mentioned, and I wanted to ask you about. Um, you've written for established IPs. You've
Yeah.
written for Aliens, and you've written for Star Wars.
Rebel
How?
Moon, not Star Wars. Yeah.
Sorry,
That's
Rebel
okay.
Moon.
Honestly, there's so many people who write for Star Wars. I might as well.
No, no, yeah, no, and also because I think in my understanding, Rebel Moon was meant to be a Star Wars project that then went to a different studio and blah blah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I stand correct. Um, Corrected. Sorry. So yeah. So do you get approached to write for established IPs, or do you express an interest? How does that work?
Well, so for Vasquez, I did express an interest. I actually wanted to do an Alien versus Predator because I love Predator. I'm obsessed with Predator. Um,
That was a better movie than people give it credit for. Alien versus Predator.
I like Predator. Yeah. So I wanted to do that. And they're like, well, we don't have the license for it anymore. And we don't have room for a Predator license either. How would you like to do Alien? And I was like,
Yeah, let's do
I
it.
want to do Vasquez. And it just kind of flowed naturally. And then I was approached to interview for Rebel Moon. And then Violet, which is the Conan, um, world universe, I asked as well. I said, oh, well, what do you have? And so it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. So, it just
Yeah.
depends on what's happening. And yeah.
And is that through your agent, or do you deal with the publishers directly?
Sorry?
Is that via your agent, or do you approach the publishers directly?
Agent.
Yeah, agent. Yeah,
Yeah.
that elusive figure. That I talk to a lot of indie authors, and the battle to find an agent seems to be, a difficult. Yeah, kids, don't worry. I understand. It's okay. So I think I've lost your sound.
I had to mute it because, yes, a little one has wandered. I told them, I said,
It's
I'm
okay.
doing a podcast. They've wandered in, completely forgetting.
Nah, or maybe they want to be on screen. It's all right.
Sorry about that. I muted so you didn't hear.
No worries. No
Sorry,
worries.
can you repeat the question?
No, yeah, I was saying a lot of the indie authors that I talked about, that I talked to, their frustration is finding an agent, is those gatekeepers into the publishing world. How was that for you? How did that work out?
So it took me 4 novels to get an agent.
Right, and just sending them around, just
Boom, 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 boom. Like, publishing in general is a game of persistence. It's a game of self-belief. You have to have a very, very thick skin. And getting an agent is no different. But this is the thing, getting an agent is only part of the puzzle, right? Because you can get an agent, you're like, yes, okay, all this stuff is going to happen. Your agent has to sell your book to a publisher. There's no time frame on that. There's no guarantee. You don't know what the market's going to be doing. You don't know their budget. You don't know what else they have on the books. There are so many other things. So yes, having an agent helps so much. However, it isn't going to guarantee you're going to get a book deal. It isn't going to guarantee any of these things because there's too many variables. So for me, I do a hybrid of self-publishing and traditional publishing because I have an agent.
Yeah, because I interviewed Joshua Bilmes. He's one of Brandon Sanderson's agent, and he was telling me that sometimes he might sell a book for like 12,000, 13,000, and given how long it takes to write a book, like that's not going to make you quit your day job. That's not necessarily going to allow you to just sit at home and churn out a book every year. So yeah, it is difficult. But how does it work for the horror genre? Because I've always held the opinion that horror works better in the short story format, but that's very ephemeral. And I don't know what the publishing landscape for short horror stories is like. I love those 30s magazines, but those things don't really exist anymore physically. So did you start with short stories, or did you go straight into novels to begin with?
So I actually started a novel, right? I started a vampire novel, but because I didn't know anybody and I didn't know where it was going to go, I started submitting short stories and kind of getting to know people, getting to know editors, getting to actually hone my craft as I tried to get an agent or get this book published.
And sorry to interrupt. And all of this whilst having however many kids and presumably a day job as well? No.
No, because at the time when I first started writing, I was a full-time mom and wife. So I was
Right.
at home. So
Right.
I had time on my hands. I didn't think it was going to be anything. It was good. It was just something I did because my kids were older. They were going to school. I needed something. There were issues in the relationship. Uh, and so I really needed something. I was really kind of emotionally and mentally on my knees at that point.
Hmm.
And it just happened. And I just kept at it. And I wrote everything. I wrote novellas, I wrote short stories, I wrote this novel. It didn't get anywhere. Nobody wanted it. So I ended up self publishing it. But at
Hmm.
the same time, um, still churning out work because I didn't have a full-time, well, being a mom is a full-time
No,
job.
no.
Being a
Yeah.
parent is a full-time job. But
Never ending.
so I was a stay-at-home mom doing all of this, and then it just kind of snowballed. Um, and I'm no longer married now, but I write full-time, and I do a bit of everything. So I write novellas, I write short stories, and I think you're right. Like in horror, a lot of people love the novella. The problem is big publishing, like your big five. There, it's just not enough money for them, right? They just want novels, flat
Hmm.
out. Same with agent. If you're trying to get an agent, don't approach them with a collection. Don't approach them with a novella. You have to have a novel. Most agents will not give you,
Okay.
they'll kindly say, come back when you have a novel.
You go straight with the short stories. You go straight to the magazines, right?
Or anthologies,
Or
or,
anthology.
I'm lucky now, I get invited to anthologies.
Okay. Yeah.
So in the fall, I was going to say next year, but it is, next year is
It is
this
already next year.
year. I'm very lucky to be in the Stephen King anthology for The Stand.
Mm.
So that comes out in August, and Stephen King did an intro for it, and it's all the stories are uh, based in that universe of The Stand, which is an amazing piece of work.
Oh, we just opened a can of worms, and if you don't want to talk about it, I'll move on.
That's
That's
okay.
fine. So my long-term held opinion is that Stephen King doesn't write horror. The Stand is not a horror story. It's just horror can only work for so long a period of time. You cannot keep that tension on the
Mm,
reader for 800 pages or however long The Stand is. I think those books, The Stand, um, Firestarter, all those long ones, Dreamcatcher, it's more of a sort of paranormal sort of thing, but it's not really horror. I only understood Stephen King until I read his short story collection, Skeleton Crew. That was
mhm.
like, oh yeah, that's the horror bit, not all the big chunky books. What's your take on that? Is there a limit to the length in which you can keep that sense of dread and fear into the reader?
Well, yeah, because at some point you have to explain what's happening. Um, you really have to explain because otherwise people are going to be lost, right?
Hmm.
And you're like, what's happening? And you end up getting that in The Stand. You get into all the characters, you understand what's happening, you understand the world. But yes, that, like, oh my God, that real nail biting tension, you don't get it. It's kind of like if you were to compare Twilight
Hmm. Hmm.
versus something like, it's not even that, like the new Nosferatu, if anybody's seen it, right? There is a huge difference between a really graphic depiction of horror, whether it's a creature, whether it's a slasher, gore, or it's a shifter like a werewolf.
Hmm.
Um, so I think one good film that I think it really encompasses horror is American Werewolf in London.
Oh.
because it starts and you know exactly, and you know from the get-go, you know he's a werewolf. And
Yeah.
you just go on that journey until the end, right? But it
Mhm.
keeps, and then that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
He dies. It's, you know it. And it's scary because like, well, what's going to happen? And then he's got this love. And then, but you're right. It's when you read something that's really long, it becomes more of a character study in like grief and what's happening. And
Yeah.
so in this anthology for The Stand, they're all short stories.
That
So
may
I
work.
wrote mine based in London.
Mhm. Yeah. So here in the chat, we got long-term friend of the channel, Ian, and he said that in his opinion, Stephen King writes tension thrillers.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a way to put it.
I think, yeah, absolutely. And so I've read, like, for example, like The Dark Tower. I wouldn't say
Hmm.
that's horror at all.
Mm.
I
The
didn't
one
finish
novel,
the series, but I
yeah,
wouldn't say that's horror to me, for example.
I haven't even started. I'm not curious even about it. But the one of his novels that I actually it did really work for me, but maybe because the structure is actually the structure of a short story, is Pet Cemetery, because
That's scary.
it finishes in that very classical italics and ellipsis, and there's a big reveal at the end, and you are left with that sense of dread right at the very end. And I think that's what a horror story should leave you with. Um, but, but I think, whereas I love short horror stories, it's tough because they are so disposable. There are so many anthologies, there are so many over time that almost I don't know if in a bit of a rich word, but in terms of legacy for a writer, it would be difficult to build some kind of legacy or a long term productive income stream by just writing and churning out horror stories.
Absolutely. But that is also why, so I think it also depends on what level you are, because I was, you get paid depending on the anthology, what the book's going to generate, how big the publisher is, will depend on what you get paid. And like the going rate is like, well, like pro rate is like, you want like 8 to 10 cents a word, right?
Right.
So what I've done and what I continue to do is, typically for a short story, an anthology, it's like a 6 month to a year limit, right? Usually it's like 6 months. I've put out a lot of collections that I have self-published that I've now been able to sell. And what I've been doing is I've taken, because people do like small reads, they do,
Hmm.
especially in horror. So now what I do, if I don't want to do a collection because I feel it's not cohesive, I have something called the Black Series that I've been putting out, and I've been publishing myself. And I've taken all my backlist of stories, and I've created the same cover with just the text, a small image, and I'm releasing all of my backstories individually in the under 30-minute read for people to download.
Hmm.
And I love it. I really love it because, it just generates income on its own. And
Hmm.
I'm very grateful I'm at the point in my career where I have enough of a readership that people will buy it. Um, but I've had a lot of collections. So in February, I have a collection coming out called the Pink Agave Motel. A lot of new stories, but then an old stories that I've put together. Um, And so that's always an avenue. So you
Hmm.
put together a collection. Again, it depends on where you are in the journey. I wrote another collection that I personally love and I feel is like my best. It's called Mestiza Blood.
Okay.
And a lot of people, yeah, it's interesting. A lot of mythology. It's short horror, urban legend, unlike the Pink Agave Motel, which comes out in February, just before Valentine's, is heavy
Or for
erotic
present.
horror. So it is like erotic horror, hardcore,
Okay.
because that's
That,
another
that,
subgenre.
that's something I want to get to about later on. Because something you mentioned, it sort of makes sense to me. So before my reincarnation as a father, I used to dabble in writing. So I did write two sort of horror story collections myself. And it's something that you mentioned about them being cohesive, like sharing some kind of overall, all-encompassing theme. Is that important? Is that important when approaching, like, if you got several ideas for short stories, that they need to somehow be very loosely connected or thematically linked?
Oh, absolutely. So, for example, Mestiza Blood refers back to my identity, being, my indigenous roots, and also, having European blood,
Hmm.
being Mexican American, um, growing up in South Texas. What what is my identity, and also the stories that were born from that identity. Um, and so for me, that's what it's about. It's that melding of identity, mestiza blood. What is a mestiza? What's a mestizo? It
Mm.
didn't exist until the conquest. So that is the theme of it, right?
Hmm.
And this new collection, the Pink Agave Motel. The Pink Agave Motel is a novella in the center of the collection, and it's a place where all of these creatures, mythological, cannibal, vampires, all sorts, go to live and be who they are. And the rest of the stories around it they're all erotic in nature, with romance, but also
Mm.
horror. So I have a story in there about, Cabin in the Woods is one of my favorite horror films. I always like the merman in there. So I'm like, let me write a merman story. Let me write a
Yeah.
hot merman story based in Texas. Let me write a story about tarot cards. So in the Pink Agave Motel, it's all about erotic romance horror, right? All these different creatures involved in these love triangles or these scenarios with lovers, and eroticism. So yeah, you have to have something that kind of brings it together, and people can read it
Okay.
either in one go or can put it down, pick it up again, and they're like, "Oh, I'm back in the room. I'm back in the
Yeah, yeah,
room."
yeah, yeah. I mean, I do that a lot in between big books. I now, like, I started one of Joe Hill's uh, anthology of short horror stories, and they are nice to maybe just read one or two between bigger books,
Yeah,
and sort of they're very great sort of palette cleansers between chunky books.
exactly, exactly.
But I think this is something where maybe we're going to disagree, or you're going to open my mind. I don't know. So one of my other long-term held beliefs, something that I sort of can't stand: sexy vampires. Vampires shouldn't be sexy. Twilight, True Blood, uh, Interview with a Vampire. It should be Nosferatu. It should be Bram Stoker's Dracula. No.
So this is my thing. So I wrote so one of my so in the Pink Agave Motel, they're frightening. Okay,
Okay.
these
Good stuff.
vampires appear human, but their anatomy is frightening. They rip open bodies. I'm not holding back. They're not soft and well. They
As they
are.
should
At
be.
the opening of the Pink Agave Motel, she literally has this guy in her room, ready to rip him to shreds, and she does, and I describe it graphically. Um, so I wrote Immortal Pleasures, which came out earlier last year, and it's basically about a real historical figure, La Malinche,
Mhm.
and she was the translator
Cortez,
for.
Cortez's lover. Yeah.
Yes. And she died in real life at like 28 from disease, like a lot of the indigenous population did. And so she's just a regular person, right? So much of her history was destroyed. So much about her was misunderstood. So I wanted to kind of bring that back and, bring vampirism to other cultures. Like, well, The original story of being a vampire was based in Eastern Europe, where there is no sun, where it's dark, where it's cold, where it's all of these things. But what if vampirism was brought elsewhere to someone who lived in a hot climate where the sun was always shining, who had different beliefs? Malinali believed in a pantheon of gods, a cross. She'd look at the cross and be like, okay, I'm not scared of that. What does that even mean? What the hell is that? Vampires who have never encountered Christianity, why would they be afraid of Christ or God? They don't even believe in it. And the vampires where I write about, like, they're more powerful than any god that, can be presented, because, well, where is he? What's he doing? So for me, I wanted to bring that, the sacrifice, the blood sacrifice, the all of those things that are not based in Christianity when it comes to vampirism, and just a human that ends up with this extraordinary life. And also using things like tonali, which is the soul energy that the Aztecs believe in, which we all possessed. And for me, they're scary because, well, they can disguise themselves as human, but in any second, they will literally rip you to shreds. They don't care about the cross. There's nothing that can stop them. And to me, that's scary. That's more scary than something that is visibly horrific. But also, I wanted to bring in, like, the real horror of her going into villages and watching, slaughter, going into watching temples being razed to the ground, and churches being erected. Like, what did that mean? There's a really good book called Piñata by Leopoldo Gut, a Mexican writer, and that's a great. You should read that. It's smaller. It's called
Noted.
Piñata. It's good.
Noted. Okay.
It's really good. And that keeps the tension, because we were talking about that, how to keep the tension, and that's fantastic. But yeah, so yeah, my vampire's a little sexy, but they're not.
Okay, just so long as we're not into some sort of Twilight, like I said, True Blood sort of environment. But listening to you talk just now, it always amazes me, and I think, like, I know that I could never be a writer, and I recognize when I'm talking to a true writer, because if someone said to me, write a vampire story, I would be very much in the framework of the traditional vampire story. Whereas what you've done there, that's the clever thing. Like, you take it back to, sort of 16th century Mexico, and what would that look like, and what would that imply, and then you start asking questions, and you start crafting and creating a new thing that very few people will think about, and that's when you bring something original to a very classic tale. It's a bit like the comic 28 Days of Night? They made the movie as well.
Yeah, and it was the movie 30 Days of Night, though.
30, 28, 30, maybe I was today short.
Terrifying. Like, their faces and the teeth. It is one of my favorite vampire films. It is terrifying.
And it's that idea, again, that original thing of, well, if vampires don't like the sun, let's take them to Alaska for that whole month where there is no sun and see what happens there.
Exactly. I love that. I love that.
So that's the clever thing. And you've done exactly the same thing there. What was I going to say? For anyone wanted to sort of get started with your work or get to know you as a writer, which one of your novels or anthologies would you recommend? So what should I begin with?
So I honestly, it depends on who the person is. So if you are a mom, you have a few kids, you like folklore and I'd say The Haunting of Alejandra, because that deals with motherhood, postnatal depression,
Mm.
and The Tale of La Llorona. If you want something that will kind of be a good intro, I would say The Queen of the Cicadas. That is goes back to a hate crime in 1950s Texas, and also spans to now.
Okay.
And so you get to see the Aztec Queen of the Dead, and you get to see what Texas was like after the Bracero program, farm workers. My great grandparents were migrant workers, so it's kind of an ode to them, that book.
Hmm.
A short story collection, I would say Mestiza Blood. If you want a short fiction and you're like girl power, you like The Exorcist, you like The Craft, I'd say Goddess of Filth.
Hmm.
Um, Sci-fi, go for Alien Vasquez, or
Yeah.
honestly, I would say go on to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, go on my website, and then just have a look. Read the description.
Yeah. Um. So again, I maybe being stereotypical here, but because my wife loves, I mean, she reads a lot of, for want of a better expression, lycanthropic pornography, I suppose. There's a lot of sexy werewolves and stuff like that. But it seems to be very much a gender thing, unless there's lots of men secretly reading these kind of things. So is this horror romance thing? Um, is your audience or your readership majority female, or is it indifferent?
All of it. So, like Immortal Pleasures would be for your wife. But honestly, I've had a lot of men post it online and they're like, oh my God, what did I just read? I loved it. Um, and so, and right now I'm working on a sci-fi vampire novelette, which will be part of my Black series. And that is going to be straight spice.
Hmm.
But I get, honestly, across the board, I get both, really, honestly, both.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm
Okay.
really lucky that way.
No, that's fair enough. Um, oh, I had the next question, but I've forgotten it, so I'll go for the next one and hopefully come back
Okay.
to it. Oh yeah, no, that was it. So, because I've seen you've got some stuff that you've written in Spanish. So, obviously, I've met like second generation, third generation migrants who lose the mother tongue sort of thing. So, your choice to write in English, is it just because you're just more comfortable with English, or?
This is going to come shock to you. Those are translated. I do not speak Spanish. I speak very little Spanish.
Hmm. Okay.
I come from that generation of um, Latinos in the US that came from migrant workers, came from people who immigrated, and they were like, no, you're American.
Yeah.
That's why I wrote Mestiza Blood. That's why I've written a lot of these other books about identity, because it's always been something I've struggled with,
Because
not
my
speaking Spanish fluently and being denied that.
well, but it's not. It's something out of your control because obviously my wife's British. My two boys were born in London, um, and then we moved here. It's going to be what, about 5.5 years ago. But with hindsight, I've realized that if we had stayed in the UK, my children would have never been bilingual. That it didn't matter that I spoke to them in Spanish when 99% of their surroundings is English. The only way they are actually getting to be bilingual is by living here in Spain and going to a British school, and then they're getting a much more balanced mix. But even so, the vehicular language in our home is English.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, and growing up, it was, I think, growing up in the United States, again, it's very different to living in Europe, where you get accustomed to people from speaking different languages from different places. I mean, there are tons of countries on the continent that speak different languages. So my children speak French. Their dad, he's Belgian, so they're half Belgian. He speaks Dutch,
Mm,
French, English, and it's just because that's where Belgium is located. He's learned these different languages. Um, Whereas in the U.S., it's very much you're
mm.
American.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you live in London, and there are certain parts of London where you don't even hear English is spoken. Depends on where
So,
you go.
it's just, I'm really grateful my children are learning French. I'd love for them to learn Spanish next. Um, but yeah, it's something that I'd like to. And there's actually a lot of Latinas who didn't grow up speaking Spanish, like Selena Gomez and Eva Longoria, who now speak Spanish. They've made it a point to learn it.
Mm.
Um, and I would love that.
Yeah. Is there, without getting too personal, but what's the word I'm trying to look for here? Is there some kind of frustration or disappointment? Like, to live up to the idea that if you are Mexican or Latina, that the expectation is there that you should be able to speak Spanish
Oh,
to a certain
100%,
degree.
1,000%. It's like, oh, you don't speak Spanish? And then you have people, oh, you're speaking Spanish. Where are you from? Like, go back to your country. Like,
Is it,
it's,
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
yeah,
Okay.
pretty much.
No, I'm very curious about all of this because, like I said, for my own children, they're still young, but they are. My wife was born in the UK, in London, but her parents are Nigerian, and she's lost a lot of that heritage. She doesn't
Mm,
speak Yoruba, which my in-laws do. So instead of food-wise and so on, we got traces of that Nigerian culture in our household, but my boys don't have any of that. And I think
mm,
my wife also struggles a little bit with the fact that she actually never went back to Nigeria. She's never visited. Um, but clearly, um, particularly when she's around here, she's not Spanish, not quite British either. And I think there is that balance, that first generation migrant balance between keeping your roots
absolutely.
and adapting.
Absolutely. And I put that all in a lot of in the Queen of the Cicadas. I put it in Mestiza Blood. Even in The Haunting of Alejandra, she's married to a Caucasian American man, and it shows kind of sometimes the issues she has reconciling where she comes from. And when she starts to try to find a solution to these demonic attacks, she goes to see a therapist, but the therapist is also a curandera. And at one point she's like, asks her, well, how can you have a medical degree, be a psychiatrist, but also be a bruja, be a curandera? And she's like, well, my mom was a curandera, but she was
Mm.
also a midwife, and her mother. And it goes, and in The Haunting of Alejandra, it goes all the way back to the conquest, and you see the whole bloodline of Alejandra and these demonic attacks and why. And so it's not just medicine for the mind, it's medicine for the soul that she's seeking. And that's what Melanie, her therapist, and a curandera helps her with, but also to spiritually fight this
Mm.
thing that's attacking her. I don't want to give too much away, but
No, no,
yeah,
I,
basically, and why, and how far back it goes, and what it is. Um,
so did you find, because I think horror traditionally has always been a great medium to express social ideas or explore social, ever from the first Night of the Living Dead movie by
oh,
Romero,
absolutely.
you think you're watching a zombie movie until you get to the end and it's like, oh wow, okay, actually there's something deep here. And
Hmm.
and obviously I think you're using that as well to explore all these concepts.
Absolutely. And um, it's important for me to do that because, art is a reflection of ourselves. Art is a reflection of our inner lives, but also the things that connect us to other people. It's the
Hmm.
thing that we can share of ourselves that someone can look at and say, wow, they've just expressed something I've been thinking, feeling, wondering about. And, look at Picasso's work.
Yep.
All of, I mean, some of his greatest work is an expression of the way he saw the world, what he was feeling, what he was experiencing. And I think it's the same with writing, you know.
Mm.
And you can, to go with horror, you can really dive deeply into subjects, emotions, themes that you wouldn't put into something else. Um, and so, I that's why I love horror. Same with science fiction. I feel you can do the same thing.
Mm.
You can really kind of let your imagination go, uh, and I
No,
do.
no, I get that. So how do you approach it? Because of late, I mean, this year I just got roped into a read along that I didn't need. So I am rereading the whole Discworld series by Terry Pratchett. And the thing that is on a second read, what amazes me and the group that we're reading, that I'm reading it with, is that Sir Terry Pratchett always made you think about things. He never preached, he never told you what to think, but he made you think in his books about different things. Um, and it's okay if you do, it's okay if you don't, different authors, but do you have a message that you're trying to put across? Do you feel like you got a strong opinion to say about something, or are you more like, this is something for you to ponder, well, after reading my book?
No, absolutely. So, for example, the Queen of Cicadas. It starts out with a woman going to a wedding in a beautiful old farmhouse. That's the people are saying that it is where an urban legend uh, kind of it originated from. And it's La Reina de las Chicharas. And you look into the mirror and you say, chichara, 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 and she will appear like a Bloody Mary, right?
Hmm.
And so you're in this, she's at a wedding, it's this beautiful farmhouse. She meets the owner. But then I go into, well, what was this farmhouse before in the 1950s? Because there are loads of these beautiful Victorian style farmhouses in Texas. And so I take it back and you see this woman, Milagros. During the Bracero program in the US, when all the boys were out fighting Nazis, they brought Mexicans over to do work.
Hmm.
But it was mostly men, but she was, kind of pulled some strings and she was able to come over. And she's murdered on this farm. It's a hate crime. And she dies in a really awful way. But, she's heard. The queen of the underworld hears her. And I go into the mythology of it. And it's just this reign of terror and violence and vengeance, but also rebirth. Um, you know, Belinda goes on this journey to find out about Milagros,
Hmm.
the origin of this urban legend, her and Hector, the owner of the house. And it takes them to Mexico, and it takes them to the story of her, and also her contacting this spirit, this goddess. She's a real goddess. She isn't a tale. She isn't just, some sort of myth from pre-Christianity. She exists and she wants people to know.
Hmm.
And she's uses Belinda and everything that's happened to be birthed again. Let's just leave it at that. But
Okay.
yes, there is, when you read it, you see all of these themes coming through: the forgotten goddess, the hate crime, the mixing of cultures, what it means.
Mhm. No, no, yeah, most definitely. I was hoping to clear up my TBR this year, but I think as a reader and anyone that loves reading, listening now, we know that we're never going to read all the books in our lives that we want. It's a never ending. Which kind of brings me to my maybe final question tonight. I think your books in the UK are published by Flame Tree Press. That right?
Flame Tree and Titan, yes,
So
the two publishers.
I had a look at the sort of the host of authors published by Flame Tree. There's a lot. There's a lot of in just one publisher. There's a lot of horror writers out there.
Hmm.
Um, is it a saturated market, or is like any other segment of fiction writing, like fantasy or like romance or whatever other genre, and it's just very competitive no matter where you go?
Honestly, no matter what you do, there's going to constantly be people. You just find your readers. You just find your readers, and for me, especially certain books, because of the feedback I've had, like for example with the Haunting of Alejandra, I have a lot of women who said, I can't believe you've talked about postnatal depression like this. I can't
Mm,
believe you actually said what I was feeling when I wasn't sleeping, when I didn't want to be a mom, when I didn't want to breastfeed, when I just wanted to be alone, when I wanted to walk out the door, when I thought, what the hell did I do? When all of, and so many women saying, I felt so seen. I felt so a goddess of filth. Again, a coming of age of these girls learning about their sexuality with this possession. It's a novella saying thank you for writing about these girls, these brown girls in these like situations and trying to find their way. I They find you, okay? Your audience will find you, and I'm just myself. I would never ever say I want to be the next Stephen King. I want to be the next J.K. Rowling. Because I don't want to. I want to be me. I want to write from me. I want people to find those stories and make them think and feel and connect. Um, and anything else is just, you know, this is fulfilling, just doing this.
mm.
And people will find you. And you just have to go on your path and your journey. Um, so, yeah.
Okay. No, no, I totally, I understand that. I get that. It's important to find your own voice and just to write your thing. I think many authors, particularly horror, it seems to be a bit of a fashion that a lot of them fell into the genre through the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and then it becomes sort of fashionable to have a diss or to be very derogatory of H.P. Lovecraft when he's been the gateway to so many people that I don't quite understand that. I understand wanting to distance yourself and become your own thing, but there's no need to bash what came before. Um, and I'm just mindful of time, so but very grateful for you being here tonight. But just one final question.
Yeah.
So you've made it now. You're there. You publish. You got your agent. Everything is ticking. Plus, you do the sort of self-publishing bit every now and then. In this day and age, how important is social media presence uh, for a writer or for you in particular? And how much time do you have to devote to that?
Oh, I mean, look, this is a can of worms. I think before you reach a certain point, it is very important because every publisher has a budget.
Hmm.
So they're going to put their budget where they know money is guaranteed. Um, and publishers look at your numbers. They want to know, what is your social media following?
Really?
Where are you? Oh yeah. Yeah, they do. The big ones, yeah. Um, and so it's for me, I believe it is important. You have to have a social media presence because depending on where you are on your journey, that's how people are discovered. I mean, Book Talk didn't blow up for no reason, right?
Hmm.
There are plenty of writers that blew up because of Book Talk, because of social media. The problem with social media now is that, like the people who own it, um, and also just getting caught up in it, as in, not being your authentic self or using it to troll, to bait, clickbait.
Mm.
Um, and for me, I use it because I like to connect with my writers and other readers. And I share part of my life. I don't show my children. I don't show anything too personal. Some personal stuff I will share.
Hmm.
So like when I went to Ecuador, my plant medicine journey and all these things, and I'll share all that kind of stuff. But like my children are a no-go, right? Where I live exactly is a no-go.
Hmm. Hmm.
But other than that, I want to share the writing journey. I want to share those things with people, especially if, for me starting out, social media was the way I kind of was able to find tips and ideas. And so you take it with a grain of salt because there's so much information out there, but also don't take yourself too seriously,
So is it a bit like vegetables? It's a necessary evil in the present day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really, really is. And look, everybody can make their own choices, right? I'm at the point of my life where I'm going to do what's best for me, my family, my career. You can have your own opinion. I'm going to have mine. I can think on my own. I don't need to, um, you know, please anyone or pander to anyone's self righteousness about this or that. I'm just going to be myself and I'm just going to figure out how it works best for what I'm doing. Um, and that's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
People can
I
make their own decisions about social media.
no, I mean, I left Twitter years and years and years ago. Not that I ever was very much into it, but I was, hoping to follow authors that I like and so on. And then it's like, I don't care what you think about US politics. That's not why I'm following you. Particularly if you got a global audience, someone like me living in Spain cares very little whether you are Democrat, Republican, this, that, or it's just we're just watching from the distance. It's entertainment, but that's not what I want to hear from authors. The problem is, I suppose, writing is a very protracted process. It takes sometimes years to write a book. So how did you keep that engagement throughout the process?
Yeah, I'm in social media, and I put out a lot. I put out much more than a book a year. Um, and for me, social media, I'm showing what I'm doing, what I'm working on, what's in the pipeline. I'm sharing other people's work. Um, all of these different things. When it comes to publishing, when it comes to what I'm reading, what I'm doing, what projects are important to me. So again, I'm Twitter has changed so much. I mean, I now go on there and I'll repost, like I have to cross post like the same thing, like, hey guys, this is out now, like 20 times. But honestly, it's part of the job. So I do it every day.
Really? Okay. So basically every day some time is devoted
Yeah, because
to,
I wake up and there are people who've tagged me in something or sharing something.
or
Or I
someone's
retweet.
message,
Sorry?
or someone has messaged you requesting a podcast interview.
Yeah, just, seriously, publishers will do posts like, and you've got to retweet them and you this and that. Da, 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 da. There's always something, right?
Mm.
Um, or, I'll have friends who say, hey, can you, retweet this or repost this on Blue Sky, or can you? And so, I want to do that. I want to help out if I can.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it's something, it's just like the daily thing. It's like part of it.
Okay. Well, I think we surpassed the hour mark, so I
That's
think
okay.
it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you.
Yes,
Before
same. I've had fun.
we go to all the listeners, where can people find you, your work, what you're up to?
Every single social media platform.
Every single one.
Everything. Blue Sky, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Red Note, all of it. I'm everywhere. Threads, uh, you know, either V Latina London or V Castro. Um, you can go to my website, which is vcastrostories.com. But if you just do a Google search, it'll give you everything. And February, the Pink Agave Motel comes out. So you can pre order that if you're into short stories and kind of sexy short stories. And all the other stuff, you can just, yeah, it's out there, it's ready.
Fantastic. Once again, thank you very much. I've really
Thank
enjoyed it.
you. I
It's
am
been
so grateful for this. Thank you. It all matters, it all
no,
helps.
no, no. It's been an absolute pleasure, and everyone that popped in, that were in the chat. There's a few people lurking there, and anyone listening later in all the different podcast platforms. That's all from us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you
Thank.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.